Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In the course of his Pensées, this unfinished work, Pascal gives us a really effective argumentative or rhetorical strategy for telling people they're wrong in such a way that they can actually hear us. In the French and in the English translation, it's expressed in terms of correcting others. He says, when we wish to correct with advantage, when we want to correct in such a way that something good is going to come out of it, then we should follow this strategy. Now, many people may balk at hearing this term correction because they have negative associations with it. Don't correct me. That's being mean to me in some way, or patronizing, or disrespectful. But it doesn't really have that sense. And if you think about correction in general, what does it mean? It means to set things right. And so if we're correcting a person's mindset or their information or their views on things, we're hopefully not just trying to be a jerk to them, but we're actually directing them towards what is true. Something away from what they think is true, which may be false, and towards what is actually true. And true not just in a speculative or theoretical sense, or banal and factual sense, but practical in terms of how they ought to be regulating their life, what they ought to be orienting themselves to, how to prioritize. All of those things are matters in which we and other people do, in fact, often require correction. So the fundamental question here is how best to get someone to see where they've got something wrong. And Pascal suggests that we don't begin with saying, oh, buddy, you've got things wrong. We don't begin by simply saying, you're off base, you're mistaken. Instead, we do something else before we even open our mouths. He says we have to notice what side, côté in French, meaning like a bank or a side of something. For example, you are seeing this chalk from the opposite side than I am. Not really a lot of change in the chalk, right? But you're seeing a blue book, I'm seeing white pages. Now you're seeing white pages, I'm seeing a blue binder. Those are different sides of things. And when it comes to all sorts of phenomena that we might take positions on and be right or wrong about, there are many sides. A relationship, for example. I think the relationship is fundamentally of this sort, but the other person who is in that same relationship thinks it's a different kind of relationship. When we get into conflicts, I think I was in the right, and you drew first blood with the terrible thing you said, and you think precisely the same, but change the people around on your side. So there can be very different sides of different things. We need to notice what side the other person is on, rather than just simply pushing our own point of view. We need to extend them a certain kind of charity or open-mindedness, or however you want to put it, the capacity to put ourselves in somebody else's place and see things not necessarily physically through their eyes, but at least try to see things the way that they might see them. We might not be successful in this, but if we don't make the effort, we're definitely not going to be successful. He also says then, if we do this, we're going to notice that there is some sort of truth from that point of view, from that side. They may not be completely correct. As a matter of fact, they may be off base about many things. It could be that the truth that they have on their side is what we might call an imaginary truth. If we imagine that things are like this, or a hypothetical truth, if we imagine that all these things are as the person perceives them, then it would be true that this is the case as the person does believe. We have to be able to grasp whatever measure of truth there is on their side. Why? Because that allows us to connect with them. That allows us to then admit that truth to that person. So it's not just about being empathetic. It's not just about seeing their point of view. Pascal says you have to actually say to that person, okay, I get you. In that respect, I think that you actually do have some things right. Here's the things where I agree with you. Here's the things where maybe I don't agree with you, but I can at least see how it appears that way to you. Here's the things I need to think about more, because maybe you actually are better informed about this than I am. And if you do this, you're treating the other person as if they have some sort of seat at the table, as if they are on some level your epistemological equal, as if they get to have a real conversation with you as a partner. Once you've done that, Pascal says, then you can also start bringing up other sides to it. And you can start bringing up the other sides from which what they're saying is actually false. You could do this in multiple ways. You can say, look, you're saying this is always the case, but if you look at it from this point of view, there are exceptions to what you're saying. So what would you be arguing in that case? You'd be saying you're making a universal rule. It admits of a lot of exceptions, so it's not really a universal rule. It looks that way to you because you haven't seen these exceptions over here. Or you might say, I get what you're saying. I understand why things seem or feel the way that they do to you from the point of view that you're coming at it. But if we look at it from this point of view, the actions that you think are noble are actually self-centered or are malicious. Or if you look at it from this point of view, the argument that you think I started maybe began way back here with something that you said. And if you've already recognized where the other person has things right, where they have a case that's plausible, and you've acknowledged it, then they'll be more willing to hear you say where they've got it wrong. Not necessarily completely. Some people are just jerks and won't listen to anything that you say. And if you make any admission that they have some things right, they will take that as being completely right. But Pascal is talking about most people, how you can deal with other people reasonably. So you reveal the other sides from which they've got things wrong. They've left things out. They've not taken something into consideration that needs to be talked about. What's the effect of this? Here's where it gets very interesting. Pascal makes a distinction here. He says that the person realizes that he or she is not mistaken. The French word for that is trompé, deceived. They are not deceived. They're not a dummy. They're not off base entirely. They're not just an idiot. But that they didn't notice all the different sides. So there's a distinction here between being like totally wrong, totally off base, just a fool, and missing something in the situation, which then you could take account of and somehow incorporate into what you do in fact have right, or perhaps use to modify what you've got right. There is a big difference between these. If you tell somebody that they're completely wrong, where do they have to start from? They can either accept your point of view presented in a rather despotic or tyrannical way, a very controlling way at the very least, Even if it's done in a sort of, this is for the best, I just want to give you the correct view on things, in a very patronizing way. They're stuck. Either they accept it or they're an idiot. But if you're working with it in the other way that Pascal is suggesting, and you're saying, listen, I want you to keep on believing these things over here. You're right about that. But these things over here, you also need to take account of them. And maybe if you bring them all together, you'll compromise on a few of the things that you're committed to right now. That's a very different point of view. That's actually much more likely to be successful. Because again, you're treating the person as an equal in some sense, as somebody who you value, somebody who has thoughts of his or her own. So the upshot of this is that the person won't be offended, he says. They won't take offense at missing some side of it. Why not? Because we all miss something, right? So we need other people to help fill us in about stuff. That's why we read books in the first place, because we're not self-sufficient when it comes to understanding things. But he does say, nobody likes being mistaken. Again, the French word tromper, deceived. Having gotten things entirely wrong. He says, perhaps that arises from the fact that human beings can't naturally see everything and that they naturally can't err on the side that they look at, but they will err in other sides. He says something else that contributes to this picture a little bit later. He tells us people are generally better persuaded by the reasons which they have themselves discovered than by those which have come into the minds of others. So how can that process of discovery take place? That doesn't mean that they have to totally figure it out on their own, but they have to be allowed the opportunity to see what they missed out on and to, you might say, take ownership of it and then try to incorporate it into the rest of the ideas or thoughts or propositions or however you want to put it that they are working with. So if you adopt this sort of strategy, it's not going to work every single time. And it shouldn't be done in a purely cynical way. This is not meant to be sort of the sandwich, if you're not familiar with that rhetorical device. That's when you give some negative feedback as the meat in between two bits of positive feedback. You're really doing a great job talking with clients. Now, I wanted to talk to you about the fact that you need to shower a lot more. Everybody's complaining how much you stink at work. But on the other hand, your spreadsheets are amazing. That's kind of artificial. That's kind of cynical, right? Pascal is not suggesting you do anything like that. Instead, he's suggesting that you adopt this as a kind of attitude towards other people. If you do this, he doesn't mention this here, but if you do this, and you approach other people in this way, it's also going to have a positive effect on your own point of view as you start to realize the sides that you yourself are leaving out when you are staking claims, when you are expressing your point of view, when you are telling other people that this is the way things are. And that can be a good thing all around. So this is a very useful strategy contained in Pascal's Pensées, and you might want to give it a try.